stuff so that we can sort it out. But we're going to cover ECG, EKG. We won't be doing the actual measurement today. The computers just don't do it that well, and they're not keeping their charge long enough. So we're going to talk about it a little bit more conceptually, but you guys have kind of already gone over some of this stuff. So hopefully, if you have any remaining questions from what you learned in lecture, hopefully we can answer some of those today in regards to how the heart works, how the electrical conduction system works, because EKGs and ECGs are going to be, they're the same thing, right? Cardio with a K is just the German word, and it's easier to write that because it's less likely to be confused with EEG. So when I say EKG, I mean a ECG. They're a really useful thing. They're something that you're going to see clinically a lot. So it's good to have just a basic understanding of how this stuff works. Many of you will take later classes where you're going to break down the specific anatomy of an EKG. We're going to keep it real general and really emphasize what does the T wave mean, what does the P wave mean, and rather than, hopefully today, rather than just like memorizing that stuff, which you've already done, hopefully you can kind of get a better idea of what's actually going on in the heart. And I'll try to use some analogies that will help you guys retain the information long term. Making some changes this week. So 31, 33, and 32. I don't know why I said it in that order. I just drew them in that order. 31, 32, 33. All of exercise 31 and 33A. We're doing all of those today. So 31 is our EKG one that we pushed to this week rather than last week. So it's one page. Most of the information you've already at least heard of. We're going to go over this one more time just to make sure you kind of get what we're looking at in the single page found on page 31. 32 is a ton of pages, well, exercise 32. That's a huge list of arteries, veins, the fetal skeleton, and really the microscopic anatomy of blood vessels. Today, we are only going to be focusing on arteries. That's it. We will not be doing veins until next week. So let me, while you guys all have your packets out, I'll show you exactly what you need to know in terms of page number, and we're going to draw a line. Page 28 says major veins of the body. Just draw a line right above that. And everything before that line that you just drew is what you need to know. So basically, once you see major veins of the body, just stop right there for exercise 32. Because we will not be covering any of the major veins this week. You can study them, to be clear. You can study them. I'm not going to ask you any questions about them next week. And I also, everything goes into pulmonary circulation. We're going to do that next week. Hepatic circulation and fetal circulation, all the stuff after that. Don't worry about it. Just arteries today.
What about the blood vessels?
The beginning part?
Yeah.
Yes, we're still doing that. So everything up there. So from the very beginning of exercise 32, all the way up to where it says major veins of the body.
What about blood supply of the brain?
Not to the brain. That's after it, right?
Yeah, that's like the very last
no
thing.
brain. Brain we'll do next time, but I still want face. Arteries of the face. Don't confuse arteries of the face with blood flow to the brain. You shouldn't confuse it based on the ordering, but just in case. I do want you to know, like, the facial artery and stuff like that. But the stuff that's going into the brain, it's a section of maybe 5 or 6 different arteries. We'll cover that next week. And the reason I'm breaking it down this way is, as you might be noticing right now, it seems like a ton of information. And it is in terms of how many words there are there. But the beauty of arteries and veins is, for the most part, they're named after their location within the body. So those body regions that we learned about way back during the very first week of the first term of anatomy and physiology, like brachial and lumbar, and I guess hemiazygos isn't a good example, but most of them are named after their body regions. And for every artery, there is about 90% of the time, there's a vein with the exact same name. And so like brachial artery, brachial vein, all those like, so by knowing the arteries, you've studied 85% of the veins already too. And so that's why I like to break it down this way. It can be really overwhelming to look at 5 pages of information. Instead, we're going to do the arteries. You're going to start to get this internal map. It's just like studying a map. It's like we all moved to a new city and we need to study a map right now. Instead of studying 2 separate maps, we're going to study one and get good at doing that. And then next week, hopefully, it'll be a little easier when you do need to know the veins all of a sudden. So That's all you're going to have to do for exercise 32. Exercise 33A, we're doing all of it. And that's more of a blood pressure, a little bit more conceptual cardiovascular physiology exercise. So we'll be doing all of that. So regarding vessels, all blood vessels, so anything from exercise 32. Arteries for this week and veins for next week. I'm only going to ask you ask you questions about this material from pictures in the lab manual. I will not be using any of the models for anything other than the heart, like what we already did. So we have blood vessel board people over there. I'm not going to use those. I'm going to use unlabeled models from your lab manual. So I'm going to use the exact same pictures. So you will know what you're looking at. It'll be familiar. I just have a software, I have the ones with the labels removed. So study from your book. The one caveat, and this doesn't matter for next week, but for the practical, start taking into account how you would know that you were looking at the arterial blood flow, not the venous blood flow, even without the color. Because the color's invented, right? It's not a real thing. And I won't make it terribly difficult, but if I give you like a full person circulation, you should be able to tell if you're looking at arteries versus veins, even if it's black and white. Because a lot of the ones I'm going to give you are going to be black and white. Next week, again, it doesn't matter, because next week your quiz will be all arteries, so you'll know that. But for the practical, and I'll try to remind you again next week, try to look at those differences. Step back and look at the whole circulation, and make sure you can tell arteries from veins, even without the aid of color. Yeah?
Is there any way we can get a copy of those in black and white so they're easier to see?
You can photocopy them in black and white. I don't have a copy of them in black and white. The way I make them black and white is just print them on a black and white printer. And so they're all colored for me. I can give you, let me embed the file. I think I can just embed the file that I have in the website for this week's information. It'll be colored, but it'll be unlabeled. And so then just print it on print it in black and white, it'll come out black and white, because that's what I'll do. It's not a separate copy, it's just the colored one printed in black and white. And grayscale, so it'll still be gray. So you'll see the layering that they try to illustrate. All right, so let's go back and take a look at EKGs real quick before we start getting into newer information. So on page 25, that's where I'm going to start.